Hello and welcome back to the EOC Podcast, Emergency Operations Conversations. I am your host, Jeff Perkins, and it's awesome to have you back with me after a nice holiday break. I hope everybody enjoyed their time off, spent time with family, and just really enjoyed everything that the holiday season has to offer. And I'm very happy to be coming back today and getting back online. And I'm really happy to introduce today, we're having my first guest on the podcast. It's Mr. Mike Harryman. And Mike Harryman and I kind of go back a couple of years. So he was one of the first people that I wanted to definitely have as a guest on the podcast. And I'm really excited to have him with us today. I know that he's going to share a lot of really good insights about resilience, which is something near and dear to my heart and something that we've hit on in previous episodes as well. So a little bit about Mike Harryman. He is the Resilience Manager and Director of Continuity of Operations and Continuity of Government for the Oregon Department of Human Services and the Oregon Health Authority. In this role, he oversees critical planning to ensure Oregon's government can continue operating during disasters, including the anticipated Cascadia subduction zone earthquake and subsequent tsunami. As Oregon's first state resilience officer, Mike led the development of the 5-year progress report on the Oregon Resilience Plan, crafted a strategic white paper for Governor Kate Brown on next steps for resilience, and built a 33-member interagency council to improve government continuity. Previously, as the Director of Emergency Operations for the Oregon Health Authority, he managed the state's Emergency Support Function 8, or ESF-8, focusing on public health and medical services during emergencies. As a retired Master Sergeant and Gulf War veteran, Mike's 22-year career in the U.S. Army shaped his commitment to service and leadership. Academically, he holds a master's degree in emergency and disaster management, a bachelor's in science and business management, and is a graduate of the Naval Postgraduate School's Executive Leadership Program. Mike is now serving as the president of the Oregon Emergency Management Association, or OEMA, and he continues to lead efforts to enhance emergency management practices across the state in that role. Mike, it is awesome to have you. Thank you very much, sir. That is an impressive resume. For folks that are getting into the field, how did you stumble across this path?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me, Jeff. So you said I'm your first live guest, huh? Wow. Impressive.
Absolutely, yes.
I feel honored. Somewhat kind of stumbled into it. So when I retired from the military, I started with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and probably within a couple of days, there was a ship called the New Caressa, and it ran ashore down in Coos County, and it was the first time a lot of Oregonians got exposed to incident command structure. Obviously, the Coast Guard and the county and a couple other state agencies were the lead. I got asked to go to some ICS courses, but didn't know what ICS stood for, but I said, why not? And then I moved over to the health department in about 2002 time period, and was offered the position to oversee the public health preparedness program. It was both funded by CDC and then the hospital preparedness program. Now it's funded by the ASPR grant. And ASPR is the Undersecretary of Strategic Reserves, something like that. I don't know. I mean, it's been a while, but they provide annual funding to the states. And so that is part of the ESF-8 umbrella. And I thought I'd do that for a couple of years. And after about 10 years, I was very comfortable in the position, and got a phone call from the governor's office and wanted to know if I'd be willing to consider being the state's first resilience officer. Now, I was not their first nor their second choice. I was probably number 8 or 9. But, sometimes, when things come knocking your way in a good way, you need to take the opportunity. And I thought after 10 years, I left the program in pretty good shape. But, it's kind of one of those callings, it's not just being in public service, because there's we got 40,000+ state employees, and, all of them are in public service, but do they all work in the world towards emergency management? Obviously, we have public safety, which is paramount. But, the world of emergency management is definitely in the back burner. It's kind of one of those disciplines that has really never got the due respect. In Oregon, we have 36 counties, and half the counties, the emergency manager works for the elected official known as the county sheriff. The other half of the county EMs work for just a different blend from HR to admin to public safety to public works, and and they're not all paid the same, right? And obviously the bigger counties have a little bit more robust program. In our rural counties and in Oregon, we also have what is known as frontier counties, where the joke is there's more coyotes than people, in those counties. And they have one-person shops, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But, some folks, not everybody that had a military background is cut out for emergency management, because, it's not the military where you have a definite chain of command and you have a mission. I think what I've learned in emergency management, it's not the mission, it's the people come first. Your workforce, the people that you have the privilege to lead, and also, for Oregonians and people visiting the state, we have some huge disasters in the past, and we live in earthquake country, and obviously we live in wildland fire country. So, and heck, we got volcanoes, in our backyards, and so any day something could unfold rather quickly, or it could be a slow burn, which say we have several days ahead of time, usually a weather event now, and it lets us pre-position people, pre-position equipment. But in general, the emergency management field is definitely underfunded and under-resourced across the state. And I think we'll talk a little bit more, about that in this interview. So
yeah, absolutely. Anyway. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast, is because I feel like, emergency management is, like you said, one of those things that gets put on the back burner and doesn't get a lot of, attention. And, one of the reasons is because it's not in the center of the action. An EOC isn't front lines, exciting stuff. They rarely ever make movies or exciting TV shows about what goes on in an EOC. And so a lot of people are saying, no, I'd rather go be a cop and or go be a firefighter or something a little bit more glamorous and exciting. So, hopefully, as more people listen to this podcast, they can start realizing like, oh, okay, I can actually make a difference and start setting some strategic plans and everything else that those frontline responders were actually going to act on and really help out people. But I got to say, for someone who was choice number 8, you were a great choice, sir. And that's when I first met you, was when you were in that position. And as an aspiring and brand new emergency manager, just cutting my teeth in the field, you were definitely somebody to look up to, and always oozing professionalism in the field and kind of glamorizing it for me as a nerd coming up. So I really want to thank you for your service in that role and your continued service to the state, sir.
Well, thank you. You said glamorous, huh? Well, okay.
Absolutely.
I haven't heard that with my name mentioned in it before. That's a nice compliment. Thank you.
Well, that was a first time for everything.
Yes, there is.
Well, let's get into resilience. That's the reason that we're here and the reason I got you on the podcast today. So just a softball question to start you out. What does resilience mean in the context of communities to you, especially someone that works in like ESF8 and mass care?
Yeah, I would just say, first of all, it's taking care of people. Mass care operations, public health are tied jointly. So in the world of the emergency support functions, you have the mass care side, which is ESF6, and then you have the public health and medical services, which is ESF8. I mean, they're joined at the hip. And in Oregon, the Oregon Health Authority does ESF8, and the Oregon Department of Human Services does ESF6. And, it's a strong relationship. And it took some events to actually bring them together in a way, not so much that the staff tried, but it brought the leadership of those organizations to see what that really meant. And, we had a terrible, what we call the Labor Day fires in September 2020. And, we saw some resilience at the time, but people really didn't think about like, wow, they lost their homes and things like that. But the after effect leading up to, even trying to get into long-term recovery, and we're like, 4.5 years into it, and they're doing recovery. They're going to be doing recovery for another 10 to 12 years or longer in those communities. But I like to think about infrastructure. We are so dependent on flipping a switch to have our lights come on, flushing our toilet, having fresh drinking water come out our tap, go to the refrigerator and get our food, drive down the road, get our gas. And I think people, in general, the public just thinks that either the state or the feds are going to come rescue them within an hour, or, this is already fixed. I don't understand why it took so long. And, just look at North Carolina. The disaster that we saw in North Carolina from the hurricane and into Tennessee, it wiped out roads. It changed the channel of rivers. It wiped out communities that, probably were used as very beautiful communities, and people traveled there for tourism. We have the same thing in Oregon, all throughout the state. And I just really think that, the piece about resilience that I learned when I was in the governor's office, and I learned from some really smart people, whether it was Dr. Goldfinger from OSU, Professor Toomey down at U of O, or Yumi Wang when she worked with Department of Geology and Mineral and Industries, Dogami. People define it like in 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 years. I'm sorry. 3 days is like, can we have the public safety emergency services stuff done? Have we done all the life safety stuff? Within 3 weeks, is our infrastructure kind of getting back up and running? Roads open, gasoline, grocery stores, pharmacies, and 3 years. I said 3 months, but I meant 3 years. Are we knee deep into recovery? And so think of that 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 years as what I consider resiliency. And every community, from an individual person all the way up to the President of the United States, who can do federal declarations, has a role to play, and everybody in between there. So I'd like to think about infrastructure. To me, it's about making sure our infrastructure, our utilities, our privately owned utilities, are they maintaining and upgrading their infrastructure? And in many cases, we see that happening all the time. We see, obviously, the roads we drive, they're doing construction on it. And people are like, oh my God, this is a pain in the ass. I live in, Milwaukee. And so the Oregon City Abernathy Bridge is being seismically retrofitted. And it's probably going to be done in about a year and a half, and sometime in 2026. That particular bridge plays a critical role of when we can get resources into the greater Portland metropolitan area, whether it's through our Terminal 6 that we have an agreement, and this is a verbal agreement with the Port of Portland to use that as once we can come up to Columbia. The Port of Portland also oversees the airport, and if the airport's open, some with limited bases, can we get resources flowing in there, additional people and resources, and we want to move them down Highway 205 and into the valley. And so I think everybody has a different place and a different role to play when it comes to resiliency. But for me, it's more than just, am I resilient at my house? Do I have backup power? Do I have food and water that'll last me a couple weeks? And honestly, probably between 2 and 4 weeks, I think I'm pretty good. But it's in between there. You're either going to be at work or at home or somewhere in between when something really catastrophic happens. And, sometimes when I'm just driving to the store, I'm thinking, man, I forgot my go bag in the car. What if it's just, you kind of think about that. But the subduction zone, the Cascadia subduction zone is our biggest threat to not only our infrastructure, but to just life in general as we know it in the Pacific Northwest. And I think at times, like we saw the earthquake on December 5th out in Northern California and the tsunami warnings, no notice event, real life. And it got the attention of, the coastal counties, Coos and Curry County in Oregon. It got the attention of state agencies. It got the attention of the public, but it was in a very remote area of the state. And so, in general, does that really help resonate with, folks that make policy and provide funding? So policy usually comes from the governor's office or through the Association of Oregon Counties, League of Oregon Cities, working with legislators. But the legislators have the funding. We'll talk more about that in a bit. But, it's just being aware, read the room. And I mean, read the room when you're outside, when you're traveling, you're going to the beach for a weekend with your family or let people know where you're going, which way you're going. And do you have enough stuff to stay in your car for 2 to 3 days if you got stranded? I'm not a worrywart, and I don't believe the sky is falling. I think Oregonians and the state has done a really good job since around 2009 when they started their very, very first resiliency grant for schools and for first responders facilities, police and fire stations, in a grant that is overseen by the Oregon Business. And Oregon Biz is what they're called. And they have every year they get $100 million for school retrofitting and $50 million for first responders, police, fire, and hospitals. And these are bonds. And so the state takes that on and pays the debt on that. But it's, probably since 2008 or 9, we're probably around $800 or $900 million the state has invested in these things. And there have been ripple effects, obviously, from winter storms to flooding to wildfires. That event then makes legislators focus on that immediate, what do we need to do? And then you roll up your sleeves and you start doing all the hard work, and that's called recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the next R, right? It's the 3 R's of emergency management. Now, you mentioned that there's some significant investment, financially that the states put forward into resilience programs. And that kind of leads me to my next question is, how is resilience, measured? What is successful resilience mean to you? And are we doing a good job of using those funds, and are we measuring resilience, and is there an impact that the funds are having on communities? Is there more that can be done? But really, how is it measured? What is the measurement of resilience that's used?
Good question. So after the 2011 Tohoku earthquake in Japan and the follow-on tsunami that killed probably 20,000 people in the northeast corner of Japan, the state of Oregon, we have a seismic commission called the Oregon Public Safety Seismic Commission, OSPAC, and they were tasked to come up with a 50-year plan to prepare for, how to get the state's infrastructure going in the right direction. It's a roll of the dice. You don't know, is Mother Nature going to unzip that subduction zone within those 50 years or tomorrow or maybe 150 years from now? But they wrote this plan. And it was done with about 180 to 200 volunteers. Nobody got paid. And they broke it down into chapters. And so, I would say that was when you mentioned I did a 5-year review of the plan when I first got into the governor's office. And I went to the 3 past chairs that had been the chairs of that commission and came up with just a simple way of saying, hey, these are all the recommendations in each of the different chapters. This is the feedback I got. Some of the chapters specifically called out certain state agencies by name. So, I would go to those state agencies, those directors' office, and ask them if they had a way of any metrics that they could share, and they struggled with that. But in reality, they did come and give me some information. Sometimes they needed to go back to the legislators and get a statute or, update their OERs. But having those 3 past chairs of that commission review the worksheet before it went public was, to me, very, very important. And, basically, we could showcase that. Now, they were going to do a 10-year review in 2023, and, Mother Nature and events took over, and that just hasn't happened. And I like to think that the commission itself right now is either thinking about, do they need to do something? Now, some folks, and I'll give you 2 groups, smart people in the general public thought 50 years was, way too long to build resiliency. Why didn't we just pick a few things and do it like in 10 to 20 years? Legislators, when they were presented, because they were the ones that asked for this, when they were presented with the 50-year plan, that blew them away. One, they can't obligate funding other than bonding past 30 years, past their 2-year cycle. So they do, in Oregon, they do budgeting every 2 years, but we have 2 sessions, a short session in the even years and the long session, which is coming up in the odd year. And legislators, it was overwhelming. So they punted and they asked a group, another bill was introduced, and we formed what they called the Senate Bill 33. That was the bill that named, the inner workings of this smaller group. And it was led by Professor Scott Ashford down from OSU, engineering director. I think he's not an engineering teacher, but he led the group, and he thinks like an engineer, and nothing against him, but he turned in a 2-page report at the end of it. And one of the key things was to create the state resilience officer's position in the governor's office, not in some other state agency, so it would get buried. That was kind of the genesis of the investments for the seismic rehabilitation grants that I mentioned for the schools and the first responders. it created the position that I'm in. And now that John Apapamefemiu is the current state resilience officer that she's in, and just really, was an advocate for doing resiliency. Now, I will say early on in my, it probably took me about a year in the job to really get a handle on some things like who are my stakeholders. It's everybody in the public, but it's not just the governor, even though the governor is my boss. But there was a tremendous amount of people that had a lot of great ideas. And so you kind of like pack them in and then put them in parking lots. Okay, that idea, we do this, this, and this, and kind of stack them, rack them, and pack them is something I heard in an old Die Hard 2 movie, I'm just going to say. But it worked out pretty good. It allowed me to really get a handle on and make some really good positive recommendations. And I will say the one thing I'd like to compliment the Governor Kate Brown, every year that I was in her privileged to work for her and honored to work as a state resilience officer, she introduced on my behalf a resiliency bill from the governor's office. And, sometimes we got them passed and sometimes we didn't. But the fact is, she supported for 6 years in a row some type of infrastructure, and I'll just leave it at that. We didn't see that come out in the current budget, but the current budget is focused on what Governor Kotek is focusing on, homelessness, behavioral health, and housing. Can't knock that either. So, it's a competing stuff, and I'll just say that's the hardest part for continuing to maintain and build resiliency, and also to really complement the community that work around the emergency management field. And I'll say this lastly, what I've seen in Oregon is a tremendous amount of volunteer support at the county levels. Some of the counties, like I said, are very rural, and they have strong search and rescue teams. And those men and women, they do everything besides search and rescue. They'll do sandbags during flooding. They'll go down to the county fairgrounds and help move traffic around if there's an evacuation during wildland fires. It's just impressive. And I think that is definitely something, the state should make sure they're investing in, that covers their tort and liability. So when they're agents of the state or agents of the county working in a non-paid status, they're protected if they hurt themselves or they get injured while they're doing whatever the mission is they've been given to do during the event.
Yeah, absolutely. And volunteers are absolutely invaluable. They can't be replaced, because that's I would call that a true measure of resiliency, is when neighbors help neighbors, or people, help themselves and get to work and do that first critical, minute type work. When they're able to do that on their own, and they don't have to wait for the government to come in and help, I think that's a true sign of resiliency. And so these programs I've talked about certain.
Jeff, when we see snowstorms and ice storms, like, it's just raining like cats and dogs here in Oregon, but, the odds of seeing a pretty significant event happening in January, February, it's real. And, one of the things you see is not only the snow, but when it freezes rain, we have power outages, power lines are down, trees are dropping. It's those neighbors that are helping each other, immediately, because first responders, they can't go everywhere, and they may not even be able to get down the road because of whatever's happened to that particular road. So yeah, you're right. It's very important. And you don't have to be a volunteer of a community-based organization or faith-based organizations, but they are multipliers. Those organizations bring a lot of juice, a lot of mojo, I'd say, in a positive way, and been very impressed. And I think we really saw the faith-based organizations really lean in during the COVID event, and it's still pretty strong. And so that is really great to see. And we've seen more community-based organizations that really have stepped up and on shoestring budgets, have done some marvelous and outstanding work for their communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned a lot of successes and a lot of wins, that happened. But what are some common roadblocks that, are faced when it comes to resilience planning and implementing those plans into actual operations?
A couple things. Well, one, you're right about volunteers are priceless. So first of all, you can burn out your good volunteers. You can just burn them out. You use them too much, or there's apathy and you can't get any volunteers. That's a tough thing. whether you're somebody new in their role in emergency coordination, emergency management, public safety, public works, it's about relationships. So that's probably really important, is to maintain those relationships. The other thing is, not all counties are created equal. So obviously the counties that have a larger population in an urban area have a tremendous amount of more resources, but they also have a tremendous amount of more problems facing them. Where we've seen in Central Oregon and Eastern Oregon during wildland fire season, there was very little aid the state really need to do, other than the professionalism from our Department of Forestry, their incident management teams, and the state fire marshals' incident management teams, and the volunteers that were firefighters of their community. You didn't see a lot of resource requests coming in other than for public safety, mass care, just because of the number of evacuations levels that we were seeing. People in rural Oregon don't always want to evacuate from their homes. So, but their neighbor's house could be jeopardy, and they volunteer to go over there and help them, do some quick mitigation around the property. It's a tough thing to build it, and is one thing; to maintain it is another thing. And so, I've also heard in the past that some communities have gone out of their way and done a lot to bring in volunteers, and then they don't use them. They're afraid somebody in their HR or their lawyers for their organization say, well, we don't want to take the risk. The risk is, what if they get hurt? What if they get killed? Right. Well, this is a zero sum game. There are rewards to be made, and that's to bounce back as quickly as possible. And if those folks who are concerned about those, well, they could, come up with some alternative solutions and present them through different organizations' channels. Maybe we can get that kind of stuff fixed. But right now, it's a hodgepodge across the board. Some counties are all in, and other counties will stick their toe in the water. And then when something's happening, they don't have a lot of volunteers or resources. And they are then needing resources either from their communities that are next to them, the counties next to them, or from a state agency, or, and if it's bad enough and we get a president declaration, our federal partners. And when they come, they don't come quickly, Right. It's a little more complicated, but I think in our region, we're in FEMA Region 10. The 4 states, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Alaska, and, even the Canadian provinces, BC, and they all are well connected and have agreements, international agreements, cross-border. That's great. But again, it's about moving people, from point A to point B. And do we have all the tools in place to do that? And we're not. And we're seeing that because I think really the biggest thing is for the rural folks is the burning out of their volunteers. Or they've made a decision about evacuation and somebody that they work for didn't like that decision. And then, after the fact, the next thing you know, there's an emergency manager being fired because he or she, made a tough call when Mother Nature is just hammering their community. That's disappointing. We've seen that with emergency manager cyber attack. They fired a county emergency manager who probably didn't have any role in continuity of operations, but, boom. She was gone. It's unfortunate.
You got to put the blame somewhere sometimes. Yeah, unfortunately.
Well, the public wants to blame somebody. It's hard to blame somebody about Mother Nature other than the fact they'll say, we weren't prepared. Okay, what does that mean? And this is the whole idea of building resiliency. And there's no finish line. There's no finish line.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that, sometimes, these, like you said, volunteers are a force multiplier, and they're the ones that come in and actually get the hard work done, and they're happy to do it because they're doing it in their own backyards, they're helping their own neighbors, and they've got, skin in the game, so to speak, where they really want to put that effort that, even when you bring somebody in from, on EMAC or ORCA or any of these other, avenues and vehicles to bring in help from the outside, these people, the volunteers, are the ones that are really going to do the hard work because it means something to them, right? You can't replace or pay for, pay extra or anything else for that level of dedication to doing their own work for their own neighbors and their own communities. And so they're a huge force multiplier. And for, different, either elected officials or county officials or local officials to be gun shy, because they're afraid of one of them getting hurt. I think that, there can be more work done to bolster the indemnity and make sure that, the people are protected and able to get that big work done, right?
Yeah, well, in 2009, we got some statutory language changed in ORS 401, which, is under OEM, Oregon Emergency Management, and it was around healthcare workers. Not only, there's like 19 disciplines that the Oregon Health Authority licenses, give or take 19. And let's just say nurses. Nurses, there's about, at the time I was overseeing that, there's about 68,000 nurses in the state of Oregon, and they have to register every 2 years. And so, we worked out an arrangement like, hey, if you're interested in volunteering as a nurse and going somewhere else in the state, would you be willing to do that? And so it was slow, but, that's when we started our SERVOR program, State Emergency Response of Oregon, SERVOR. And pre-COVID, we probably, I was going to say about 3,000 members. And we actually we doubled that during COVID because of all the vaccine stations, and whether it was going to a rural spot or it was a vaccine station on the road or going out to migrant workers, you name it. We got a lot, and that's great. But if you don't train them and offer them training throughout, that period of time when, like we call a blue sky day, they'll just drift away. So it's a balancing act of bringing them in, training them. I believe in give them a little swag, something that identifies them. It's kind of like with the CERT program, in Oregon. Used to be if you, in some more jurisdictions, if you passed the CERT training, you got a backpack that said CERT on the back, and there was all kind of goodies in there, You don't hear too much of that anymore. And maybe it's still happening, but, that funding really came from FEMA and went through Oregon Emergency Management. And it's probably been one of those kind of federal grants that's been just getting, siphoned, and not by anybody in particular, but it's just not getting the funding from the federal level. And so communities struggle with, offering the training, making sure they're ready to go. And just sometimes you got to recognize them and celebrate their volunteerism. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. And earlier we mentioned that you currently are the president of the Oregon Emergency Management Association, or OEMA. How can OEMA bolster resilience programs or initiatives across the state?
Well, there's about 220 members, and that number's been pretty stagnant for maybe the last, 5 to 10 years. Because, we're not a really big state, but we have, not only emergency managers, we don't have all of them in the counties, some are city, some are special districts. We have public sector, we have law enforcement, we have K through 12, we started communities, utilities. So, we have about 7 to 8 committees. And the intention is to have someone chair those committees within the association, listen to the folks that volunteer to be on those committees of what they would like, not just for the association, but, is there something with the legislative session that starts on July 21st of this year. As the president, I plan on taking a very active role. I'm working with, representatives and chairs from the House and the Senate on bills that they've introduced, either committee bills or they're considering individual bills, which is always good. Working with the Oregon State Sheriff's Association and their Emergency Management Command Council, which is a group of emergency managers who work for sheriffs. I've reached out to the Association of Oregon Counties, and I'll reach out to the League of Oregon Cities, and just, it's too late for us to have someone on our behalf introduce a bill, but being active in those bills, maybe giving subject matter expert testimony, written testimony, verbal testimony, being engaged with the legislative groups, and also talk with other stakeholders out there. That's probably one of the biggest thing. And then, every October we hold our annual conference, and we ask for folks for whatever the theme may be. We haven't selected the theme for this year, 2025. I think that'll probably be done in the next 2 or 3 weeks. We ask for folks to come and give updates or lessons learned from events, real world events. Obviously we have a lot of things to talk about from the 2024 fires. We still got recovery going on from the 2020 Labor Day fires, but, also preparing for Cascadia. This last year we focused, we had a handful of sessions on behavioral health and emergency management, which really was exciting to go see. And so, the association can help connect the dots and work with other state agencies and also with other associations out there, and be a strong partner and a voice for the emergency managers of the state of Oregon.
That's fantastic. When you have a group of people together, all pushing for progress, that itself is also a force multiplier. So I think that association can continue to push the ball down the field, especially during the legislative session. Then a lot of resilience initiatives can get focused on. And, like we said before, neighbors can help neighbors. And, we don't have to be worried about anybody getting in trouble or anybody losing their job about it. Now, you've had a long career focused a lot in resilience and helping communities look out for themselves. What are some key takeaways from your career that communities that might be listening to this right now can apply it themselves?
Well, I would obviously, a lot of communities in Oregon have made some huge investments working towards resiliency, whether it's around dam safety, a county road. This is the tough thing because every community is a little different. So, if I just talk at the county level, but then, you forget about the townships and the cities of those counties. The biggest thing is, having a strong champion, whether it's from a local organization, whether it's the emergency manager, whether, what could be an elected official, could be also someone from a community-based organization. Really to lean into stuff and learn the ropes. Nothing's done quickly in building resiliency. I will say that is probably, and it's a frustration, like, my God, it's going to take 5 years to fix a bridge, or other things. And it's the long-term investment that is the difficult part to maintain, because as I said, legislators, if it's bonding money, they can do a bond for 30 years. But if it's just general fund dollars, those general fund dollars are only there for 2 years. And there's no guarantee that they will be there, after the fact, 2 years later. And we've seen that through some great bills have been introduced. They've passed, but then there's no funding for them. Or the funding for them is used up in that biennium, and there's no interest because there's new people come into the legislative office and they have their own communities they want to take care of. And so trying to, talk about resiliency, sometimes these resilience efforts will benefit maybe their community or maybe not their community, but it's good for the state of Oregon. That's a tough sell. That is a very tough sell. And so, I think the verbiage, you got to have some skin in the game, right? And you also need to know if you're not successful in an endeavor, you got to dust yourself off and get back up. And I'll give you a great example. In the 2019 session, when I was in Governor Brown's office, we had a bill to fund the Shake Alert earthquake early warning system and a program called Alert Wildfire. The two of them was going to cost just under $12 million to make these investments. The funding would have gone through and gone down to the University of Oregon through their hazard lab facility down there. And they had already plotted everything out. And at the time, in 2019, we were the weak link between Washington and California on the Shake Alert system up and down the West Coast for earthquakes. It was a governor's bill. And I made testimony. I worked with committee members. I felt, gosh, this is great. We're going to get this money and we're going to do good things with it. It went into Ways and Means, to the big committee that actually doles out all the money not only to state agencies, but also for bills and for bonding stuff. And, when it goes into there, I wasn't privileged to any of the negotiations on. Usually the negotiations are between the governor, the speaker, and the Senate president. And that's it. But there was disappointment. We didn't get a dime. And I felt like I failed. In fact, I called up Professor Toomey at the time, who was oversees the lab down there at University of Oregon, and I apologized to him for dropping the ball. And he said, "Hey, Mike, you didn't do anything. It wasn't your fault, blah, blah, blah." Yeah, I felt pretty bad for about 24 hours. And the next day I woke up, and I said, "Man, I'm just going to get after it again. I got no, the legislators aren't going to fire me. The governor could, but the legislators aren't." And I didn't want to throw anybody under the bus. I didn't want to go and find out what happened in the back room. I just, it was. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, we as a state, we stopped doing normal blue sky days in early March. When the governor declared a disaster, a statewide disaster, we went into continuity of government. We pivoted the entire executive branch to focus on COVID, the COVID response. The hospitals, obviously there was no vaccine, the masking, the PPE for healthcare workers. It was crazy. Well, during that period of time, I think in July of 2020, the governor wanted to do, she had to do some special sessions, which basically they make an agreement about what the topic is for a special session. It's usually one day. And that agreement is, again, between the governor, Speaker of the House, and the Senate President. And they had to do the first one to elevate the federal funding limitation because the feds wanted to give us a whole bunch of money, right? So we had that was a no-brainer, slam dunk. Well, about 45 days later, she needed to do session number 2, and they were going to do a little bit more focus around PPE and prioritization for healthcare workers. And I was talking to our legislative director at the time, and I said, man, special sessions, too bad they can't, think about giving us some resilience dollars. And she says, "What are you talking about?" I go, "Shake alert wildfire." She goes, "Let me see what I can do." Sure enough, during the second special, they actually gave us the funding, $7.8 million for the Shake Alert program, not for the Alert Wildfire, and we were off and running. So I would say the University of Oregon has all the stations built out now, 4 years later, and we are not the weak link. We're the strong, steady in between Washington and Oregon, and took advantage of a situation. The Alert Wildfire came the following year, and that is a great thing because the Alert Wildfire program is not only putting cameras on already towers or building towers, sharing information with the Oregon Department of Forestry and the special fire districts. But the unique thing about Alert Wildfire, the public can go on and look through the lens of those cameras. Now, during wildfire season, they can't move the camera. That goes to the incident commander and the teams that are actually trying to pinpoint, the fires and do that pre-mitigation where if they can stop a fire in the first 10 acres, that's a home run. So that's up and running. And, again, that was something that was an initial idea from a governor's bill in 2019. And, through hook, crook, and whatever, we got the funding, before I left office. And I think those are probably my 2 biggest accomplishments. And, I don't take credit for it. I'm going to give credit to the legislators that, because that's tough to actually think, man, if we do this, what's it going to do? Well, if you don't know about Shake Alert, you can Google it and find out it could save your life. It could save your business. It could save an industry. So I'll just leave it at that. And the Alert Wildfire, it was used heavily last year during 2024 fires, and we're hearing nothing but rave reviews. And also the relationship between Oregon Department of Forestry, the Hazard Lab, and the fire districts. It's just a good marriage, and I take a little satisfaction as I had something to do with that in a very direct and now in a very indirect way.
Well, yeah, that's definitely an accomplishment. And I on a previous episode, I definitely talked about, the precious seconds that Shake Alert can actually provide. Even if it's an extra 3 to 6 seconds that you have to be able to get yourself into a more safe environment. If you're working in manufacturing or something like that, those precious seconds can really mean the difference between life and death. Get yourself away from some fall hazards or some other things and get yourself to a safe space. Use those vital seconds. And the same thing can happen with, wildfires and with the, adoption of artificial intelligence technology that they've incorporated into some of these cameras that can detect, a smoke plume very small, and then you couple that with the change in the tactics, especially aerial apparatus, where they've kind of pivoted where you didn't get an aircraft on an incident until the fire was huge and it was growing out of control. This last year they really kind of pivoted and changed that to let's put the aircraft strategically on these small starts and try to get them out before they spread. And I think that, even with an unfortunate record-breaking fire season that we had in Oregon last year, it would have been much worse if the tactic had been wait till it gets big and out of control before you put an aerial resource on it. And so I think there is definitely some progress being made on that front, and I think there's definitely going to be some progress made in the legislative session that's coming up, and I'm looking forward to that. And I look forward to, I can already kind of, just with a toe in the water, I can tell that the temperature is a little hot when it comes to emergency management. As we started off, with a special emergency session. And how do we fund what we've already done with the wildfire season? Yep. And I think that's going to carry on, and there's going to be some definite focus on how do we prepare not only for wildfires, but how do we prepare better for earthquakes? Because as you mentioned, we were able to get something earthquake related, during COVID because there was an extra focus on emergency management, and I think that that's definitely what we're going to do this legislative session is put the focus on wildfire, but then approach it from an all hazards perspective.
Well, you mentioned AI and stuff. It's one thing early on when we were trying to sell the Shake Alert system, not only to, legislators, but to industry folks, right? And, they're very tight-lipped about their security systems, and, they don't want anybody just to come in. Well, with cybersecurity events, we're seeing it all the time. The United States is being hacked or probed all the freaking time. It's a balancing act to bring now AI into the equation. And, you're right. An example would be like, okay, if the subduction zone happened in Northern California, Southern Oregon, and it was going to do a full rip, the whole 700 plus miles up and down, that takes minutes for that to happen. It's not like all of a sudden one spot. With the Shake Alert system, yeah, it's going to be tough for those communities. Those communities are going to get a notice, but their biggest thing is, the tsunami warnings are going to come. The tsunami are going to come within, 15 to 25 minutes is what subject matter experts tell us. But if you're in Salem, if you're in Medford, Eugene, Salem, or Portland, you're going to have, seconds from the Shake Alert app on your phone, and it's on their phone, some sort of, it's like the Amber Alerts. It's automatically on there. You don't have to opt in. You can definitely opt into your county and get some updates from your county, but let's just say you had 25 seconds, right? As an individual, what am I going to do with my 25 seconds? It depends on where I'm at. Again, are you at home or you work or somewhere in between? And I can't give you an example exactly what Mike would be doing in that period of time. But if you're in industry, say you're utilities, and you're providing fuel, water, or electricity, what can you do? What can your system do to you can't turn it off. It's going to get probably turned off from the event, but can you lessen the blow of your infrastructure so after the shaking occurs, the repair and the recovery, can you get back to 3 days, 3 weeks, or is it going to take you 3 years? And that's the dilemma. And I think the utilities in particular struggle with cybersecurity and AI, and it's just going to be a conversation. And this session won't solve that, but this session will definitely tackle it. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And Shake Alert has some really cool stuff, in addition to like what you mentioned. And on a previous podcast, I said there's things like automatically rolling up, fire department engine bay doors so that they don't become, off the rail.
Jeff, think about this. Who would not want that? I mean, every fireman on duty, the last thing they want to do is, figure out, oh my God, the door won't go up. I mean, manually it might go up, but, just automatically, it's the same thing with hospitals. Can they send all the elevators to the bottom floor,
Right.
And open the doors so people aren't trapped if they're in the elevators. There's the whole hospitality industry is way far behind on thinking like that. And, I would not want to be on an elevator on the 17th floor of a hotel or, going down to the lobby and next thing you know, you're stuck and you're one of thousands of people stuck in elevators. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think, definitely looking at these emerging technologies and how AI continues to find its way into these technologies to make them better. I think that's definitely something that, leaders in communities can focus on, going into the next decade, because it's only going to get more advanced. It's only going to get, more people that are creative are going to find ways to make it help different resilient systems. And I think, in the next decade, we're going to see a big shift when it comes to these type of technologies.
Mm-hmm.
Now to close us out today, Mike, what are some key messages for listeners that you can share with them about resiliency? Your average listener to the podcast, what's some key messages that you'd like to share with the community?
Well, I'd say first thing, whatever your living condition is, look around. Do you have some adequate water and canned food? If you lost power, just in general, if you lost power for 7 to 8 days or, even longer, think about the food in your fridge. You want to eat that first. Then you kind of want to work your way to the freezer. And then you want to get into your canned goods and things like that. Having cash. I will tell you, my son and his wife live in South Carolina, and they were impacted by the hurricane that really hammered North Carolina. And he called me, he says, "Hey, Dad, we just lost power. And our power company says it's going to be another 6 to 7 days before we get power." And I said, "Where are you at?" "Well, we're at home." "You guys okay?" "Yeah." "So you lost power. How much cash you got?" My son goes, "I got like $27, Dad." "What the heck?" I said, "Man, how long you been living around me, kiddo?" I told him, I can't believe, you need to have cash. So the comical thing was his wife says, "Well, we do have the piggy bank that you've been giving money to the granddaughter. So we think there's like $300 in cash in there." I said, "Well, good. As long as you replace it, and that's great." I mean, it's just having that thing, do you have your medications, reorder your medications at every interval when you can get a reorder, whether it's for 30 days or 90 days, having someone you can reach out to in another state. I reach out to my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law in Illinois. Now, obviously I could reach out to my older son in South Carolina, and let him know if I'm okay, what's going on when something's impacting the state. Having that kind of thought process, about your teachers, if you got kids and they're in school, what's the school going to do with your kids if there's an event like that? There is shelter in places for mass shootings, and that's really a sucky thing to talk about, but it's reality, unfortunately. But, what are teachers in the schools' responsibility for, making sure the kids are safe and not, put them on a school bus and thinking they're going to go down the road and make it home? That's, that ain't going to cut it. If I was a parent, thank God it never happened with my kids while they were growing up. But I mean, just kind of knowing your surroundings, get engaged, let's just say, I understand you're serving in the military reserves. Is that right? Or National Guard?
Army Reserve.
Well, thanks for your service. I would say, men and women that have served in the military could join, maybe their American Legion, their VFW. There's motorcycle groups out there for Patriot Riders. Get engaged with doing something for your community and at very low cost. Get engaged in community organizations, and also if faith-based organizations are out there, and let the full-time people know that you're willing to volunteer, whatever your capacity is, but just kind of have an understanding and know the hazards that you live in. In Oregon, it's, earthquakes, volcanoes, ice storms, floods, and wildfires, and it could be cyber attack. Just to throw that in there. So knowing what your hazards are, will help you in a long way understand why, government is trying to make long-term and big investments, because it'll make hopefully the recovery and the response quicker and will save more lives in doing so. So, And those aren't all the answers, but you asked me, and that's just a few things off the top of my head.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always a good place to start. And, I've pushed out before, get to know 2 weeks ready. Use that as a jump off, where you can use those resources that are provided. If you can't figure out how to build your own plan or your own kit, visit 2 weeks ready.
Yeah. I got one alibi too. I should have mentioned this somewhere in the insurance. Most people, if you have renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance, well, look around out there for earthquake insurance if you want to think about that. I didn't find it in Oregon. So I found a company in California for mine. I've had them for about 10, 12 years now. And, the deductible's pretty high, but, then I figured my house is pretty well damaged. I may need to, cough up that deductible. In flood insurance, if you live in the tsunami zone along the coast, you should apply for the, flood insurance, through FEMA. It's probably one of the best. Now, FEMA and federal legislators don't really like that, but it is one of the best programs for people that live in, communities that could be impacted by tsunami. They might think they're not going to be flooded by the ocean. Well, Mother Nature, she bats last. So, don't discount, getting insurance for your property. And if you're a landowner or a property owner in the private sector, having insurance for your facility, because when a bad day happens and we're in recovery, FEMA is expecting you, the homeowner or the facility to tap into their insurance before they even give you a dime. So I just want to bring that up.
Yeah. And sometimes it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. So
absolutely.
Well, Mike, I want to thank you for your time, and I really want to thank you for your service to not only the state of Oregon, but also to the nation. I really appreciate that. So thank you very much, sir. And thank you for the sacrifices that I know that you and your family have made throughout your long career, both in the military and for the state. So thank you very much to you and your family. I appreciate that
very much, Jeff.
And thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for letting me be fair. Right on, brother.
Absolutely. You set the bar high, sir. Now everybody else has to go after Elvis. So thank you very much for joining me. Yeah. And you have yourself a great day.
Dead, baby. But, I get it. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining me on the EOC Podcast, Emergency Operations Conversations. I appreciate you being here, and I will see you on the next one.